everybody. Great to be learning with you at a special time, 4 p.m. Pacific, because we're having a book signing tonight for my book, Let My People Laugh. So thank you so much for joining us at this special time. Let's light up the darkness. Wow, the bell sounded a little constipated there. What is up with that? Sounds off, doesn't it? I wonder why. Sorry. Right, who's in the house? Joe in the Inland Empire, Yehuda in South Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Lorraine in Texas, Belle, excuse me, in Texas, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Carla in Brazil. Welcome, Carla. Great to have you with us. And Ella in Southern California, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Going to get right into it because we can do another double daf. Help us to catch up. Okay. We have been making our way through chapter 9 here in Tractate Sanhedrin. Today we're going to be doing Mishnas 5, 6, and 7. 5, 6, and 7, I believe. 5, 6, and 7 here in chapter 9. And the pages are 80 and 81. So this is Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 9. We've been talking about the death penalty and when and how it applies. In this case, the penalty of a murderer, which is generally speaking decapitation with a sword. Okay, with regard to a murderer who was intermingled with others, this is going to have a very specific meaning, but we haven't defined it yet. A murderer who was intermingled with others, and it is not possible to identify the murderer. All of them are exempt from liability to be executed. Obviously, right? If a murderer got away and then you know he's in a room and there's 7 other people, let's say, in that room who are not murderers, we're not going to kill them all just because one of them is a murderer. That's the obvious meaning, but there's more to it than that. Rabbi Yehuda says, the court gathers them into the vaulted chamber, known as a lakipa, where they will eventually die. Sounds like Rabbi Yehuda. He's hardcore. No, what are you talking about? There's a murderer in that room. We can't let him out. So we're going to lock them all up forever. Is that what Rabbi Yehuda is saying? 7 innocent people along with a murderer? We're going to lock them up forever? Of course not. Stay tuned. Now, with regard to all those liable to be executed with different court-imposed death penalties who became intermingled with each other, and it cannot be determined which individual was sentenced to which death. Okay, so now we have a bunch of death row inmates. They're all sentenced to the death penalty, but they committed different crimes. And as we've seen under Torah law, depending on the death penalty offense, the penalty could either be stoning, beheading, burning, or strangulation. So what are we going to do? Since we're not sure which one is, they're all subject to death. They need to be executed, but we don't know which particular death penalty applies to which person. So says the Mishnah, they are all sentenced to the most lenient form of execution to which any of them was sentenced. And of course, we've seen there's disagreements about what is the order of severity of the death penalties. The majority opinion is that the worst is stoning because it mangles the corpse the most, followed by decapitation, followed by burning, followed by strangulation in decreasing order of severity. So it sounds like the most lenient form would be strangulation. And if there were people of all different death penalties, would get all mixed up. So they would all get strangulation. In a case where those who are liable to be stoned are intermingled with those who are liable to be burned, Rabbi Shimon says they are all sentenced to be executed by stoning, because Rabbi Shimon holds that burning is a more severe form of execution than stoning. That's a minority opinion. And the rabbis say they are all sentenced to be executed by burning, as stoning is a more severe form of execution than burning. Recalling that burning does not mean burning at the stake, but rather pouring molten lead down the person's throat. So from the outside, the corpse looks whole. Rabbi Shimon said to the rabbis, if burning were not more severe than stoning, it would not have been administered to a priest's daughter who committed adultery. A betrothed daughter of an Israelite who committed adultery is executed by stoning. If burning were not a more severe form of execution than stoning, it would not have been administered to the daughter of a priest who committed adultery, who would presumably receive a more severe punishment since she was singled out for disgracing not only herself, but her priestly father. And the rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon, well, interesting point, Rabbi Shimon, but if stoning were not more severe than burning, it would not have been the death penalty administered to a blasphemer and to an idol worshiper, as their actions violate the very core of the Jewish faith. And there is a parallel dispute in a case where those who are liable to be killed by beheading, which is the murderer, were intermingled with those who are liable to be strangled. So Rabbi Shimon says they are all sentenced to be beheaded with a sword, as strangulation is a more severe form of execution than beheading, but that's a minority opinion. And the rabbis say they're all sentenced to be executed by strangulation, as beheading is a more severe form of execution than strangulation. Strangulation is they wrap a scarf around your neck, pull it from two ends until you pass out and die. Beheading, very quick, but leaves a very mangled corpse. So that's why the majority say strangulation is the more lenient punishment. That's Mishnah 5. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches the halacha, the law, of a murderer who was intermingled with others. And the Gemara asks, who are the others with whom he was intermingled? If we say that the others were upstanding individuals, it is obvious that they are exempt. Why would they all be punished for the transgression of one who happened to be among them? And furthermore, shall Rabbi Yehuda say in that case, the court gathers them into the vaulted chamber where they will eventually die? Can innocent people be left to die in this manner? Now, the vaulted chamber, the lakipa, this is bad, very bad. We've taught that the Torah does not, hold imprisonment. That's not one of the punishments that's included under Torah law. We have death, right? Flogging, and after that, it's pretty much monetary damages. There's also death at the hands of the heavenly court, for which if somebody is willfully violates such a prohibition, the court may impose flogging, lashes. And flogging can also be used for somebody who violates rabbinic provisions, rabbinic ordinances. But imprisonment is not one of the punishments that's specified in the Torah. So what is this vaulted chamber, which seems to be some kind of a cell that people are locked into, either temporarily while we're sorting it out or having a trial or something, or in some cases, forever. Like they're just left in that vaulted chamber. It's not the sort of thing where you are sentenced to 3 years in the chamber. It's not used that way. It's either we're going to let you die in there because we can't, kill you under the regular law, or we're just going to hold you there until the trial determines whether you're subject to a death penalty or not. But again, imprisonment was just not one of the options under Torah law. There may have been times and places in history where it was used, and certainly, as we've mentioned over and over again, the law of the land is the law, right? So Torah law respects the law of the land in which Jews are living, Dina de Malchusa Dina, where certainly imprisonment is the primary option, right? But that's under American law or British law, French law, not according to Torah law. Okay, so let's find out what is meant by this. Okay, so and furthermore, shall Rabbi Yehuda say in that case that the court gathers them into the vaulted chamber where they will eventually die, where murder was intermingled with innocent people? Can't be. So now the Gemara cites a mnemonic, Beis Shin Reish Kuf, for the sages who address this question. So Rabbi Abahu citing Shmuel, Rava, and Reish Lakish are who are going to address this. So Rabbi Abahu says in the name of Shmuel, here we are dealing with a murderer about whom witnesses testified and the judges deliberated, but his verdict was not finalized. Okay? So this is a person who the witnesses came to court, said, we saw him commit a murder, and the judges deliberated about that and said, yeah, he's guilty. We are going to sentence him to death. But before they could call the defendant back into the courtroom so that the senior judge can stand up and say, we the judges find you guilty and sentence you to die, this guy splits. And then they catch him, but they catch him intermingled with some other people. So let's see about this. Who are they? All right, so he was intermingled with murderers whose verdicts were already finalized. Okay. So now we have a room full of murderers, right? Absolute murderers. And let's say there's 7 people there total. 6 of them have been found guilty of murder and have been sentenced to die, and they're just awaiting to be executed. The 7th one was found guilty by the judges, but they haven't had a chance to say to him, we find you guilty and you will be sentenced to die. So the verdict hasn't been finalized, only lacking reading it to the defendant. But all 7 people in that room have been found guilty by judges of murder, and 6 of them have already been sentenced to die and told that. The 7th, he's going to be sentenced to die as soon as he appears before the judges, but before that happens, he gets mingled in with these other murderers who are awaiting execution. Now, it cannot be determined which of them is the murderer whose verdict was not yet finalized, so that he may be brought to court for the verdict. Now, the reason for the dispute is the rabbis hold that a court finalizes a person's verdict only in his presence. Since the identity of the one whose verdict was not finalized and he is now unknown, he cannot be sentenced to death. We can't finish the process without him standing there and receiving the verdict personally from the judges. And since one of them cannot be executed, none of them can be executed. Therefore, they are all exempt. And that actually is the law, right? That really shows you how reticent a rabbinic court is to impose a death penalty. If they can't do the entire procedure properly, they can't impose it. And even though the other 6 are sentenced to die and awaiting execution, now they can't be executed because there's one among them who we know committed murder, but hasn't had his sentence read to him personally by the judges. Rabbi Yehuda holds completely exempting them is also not possible, since they are murderers. Therefore, the court gathers them into the vaulted chamber. Okay, we can't impose the death penalty on them, but let them be imprisoned in this vaulted chamber and let them rot there. That's what Rabbi Yehuda would do, but we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda. Reish Lakish says, in the case where a person who was accused of killing another was intermingled with others, everyone agrees that they are all exempt, because one is not punished for a murder committed by others. But here, it is with regard to an ox, right? So Reish Lakish says, we're not talking about people. What we're talking about here, this convicted murderer, so to speak, we're not talking about a person. We're talking about an ox. Here it is with regard to an ox whose verdict for goring a person to death was not yet finalized. And it became intermingled with other oxen whose verdict was already finalized. And in this case, also the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda disagree. The rabbis hold that based on the juxtaposition between them at Exodus 21:29, which compares a human with an ox in this regard after killing a person, the law is that, like the death of the owner, so is the death of the ox. And just as a court finalizes an individual's verdict only in his presence, a court finalizes the verdict of an ox only in its presence. Therefore, all the oxen are exempt. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that the court gathers them into the vaulted chamber. Since it is an ox that gored, and the other oxen were sentenced to be stoned, they are incarcerated until they die. Sounds like a very reasonable position of Rabbi Yehuda. But the law is the law, and we follow the rabbis. Rava says, now we're on page 80a. If so, according to Shmuel or Reish Lakish, is that compatible with that which is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the Mishnah that Rabbi Yosei says? What does Rabbi Yosei say? This is the law, even if Abba Chalafta, who was Rabbi Yosei's father, and a very righteous sage, was among them. What did Rabbi Yosei say? He's saying that what? We're going to exempt them all, or we're going to lock them all up? Sounds like exempt them all. If one of the innocent people was a righteous sage? How does that change anything? This is difficult according to Shmuel, as Rabbi Yosei would certainly not include his father in a group of murderers. Are we talking about where there's the guy who just hasn't had his sentence read to him by the judges mixed up with other murderers? Why would we include say even if the righteous Abba Chalafta was among them? That doesn't make sense. What is the connection of Rabbi Yosei's father and a group of oxen? Are we talking about a group of convicted murderers who are people, a group of convicted murderers who are oxen, or a group of innocent people? And even if Abba Chalafta was among them, it doesn't make sense. It must be there's a different case that's being talked about here by Rabbi Yosei. So rather, Rava says, this is what the Mishnah is saying. In a case where two people were standing together, and an arrow emerged from their midst and killed a person. Since it is not known which of them shot the arrow, both of them are exempt. Right? So there's two people on a hilltop. There's no one else for miles around. An arrow flies off from that hilltop where those two people are and kills the guy standing next to me. We know the arrow came from one of those two guys, but we don't know which. Okay, so we can't convict both of them because only one of them shot the arrow. And we can't sort it out. There's no witness. There's no way to know for sure. So in that situation, both of them are exempt. Rabbi Yosei says even if Abba Chalafta is one of the two of them. Now, if one of the two of them, it is absolutely known that there's no way he murdered someone. It's a righteous person, a saint who the whole community looks up to. There's no possible way that he was the one who shot the arrow. There's two people on that hill. One is a saint, and the other one is a known bandit, who has committed violent acts in the past. Like, obviously, he's the one who shot the arrow, but we can't prove that 100%. So in that situation, both of them are exempt. That's what Rabbi Yosei is saying. Now, the Tana then proceeds to discuss a different matter. And then ox, whose verdict was finalized, that was sentenced to execution by stoning, and that was intermingled with ordinary oxen. Okay, so now we said a moment ago that according to the rabbis, if you have one oxen who is sentenced to die, but he hasn't received his sentence personally from the judges, intermingled with other oxen who are all sentenced to die, right? They killed people and have been sentenced to die by the court. That even in that situation, they're all going to be exempt because we don't know which is the one who hasn't had his sentence read to him. That's what the rabbi said. Now we have this other Mishnah that says something totally different. This Mishnah, an ox whose verdict was finalized and was sentenced to execution by stoning, and it was intermingled with ordinary oxen, i.e. oxen that didn't kill anybody. According to this Mishnah, the court stones all of them, kills all the oxen, the innocent along with the guilty ox. And Rabbi Yehuda says they are placed in a vaulted chamber. No, we're going to leave them to die. We're not going to do it personally. The court is not going to impose the death penalty on the oxen, but neither are we going to let this one oxen who killed a person go, even though it means that we're going to lock up these other innocent oxen inside this vaulted chamber where they're all going to be left to die. Sounds terrible for the innocent oxen. And the Gemara notes, and it is taught in a Baraisa, in the case of a cow that killed a person, and by the way, that is the law. That is the law. Because we don't want this goring ox to go out there where it might kill another person, even though it means that we're going to kill innocent oxen along with it. Because human life is more valuable than animal life. Now we're going to learn a related matter. The Gemara notes, and it is taught in a Baraisa, in the case of a cow that killed a person and thereafter calved, if it was before its verdict was finalized that the cow calved, its offspring is permitted. Okay, so here we're talking about a female ox, I suppose, right? So it's capable of killing a person. When I hear cow, it's hard to imagine a cow killing a person, but I'm sure people with much more agrarian knowledge than me will say that, well, maybe a cow, doesn't have horns the way we think of a cow, but it probably could kill a person by crushing them. Or maybe we're talking about, female oxen. Can I have a female ox? Somebody help me out here. But whatever, I'm sure that there are female cattle with horns that also have babies. And so one of them killed a person, and now it's going to, have a trial and be sentenced to die for killing a person. Now, at that point, an ox that gored and killed a person and is going to be stoned to death, you can't then take its meat and eat it. Obviously, you can't take its meat and eat it because it was not slaughtered. It was not shechted in a kosher manner, so a Jew can't eat it. But maybe you could sell its meat to non-Jews, or you could take its hide and make leather out of it. But no, because it killed a person and was stoned for that, we cannot benefit from such a cow. So the question is, well, what if after it was sentenced to die, but before it was executed, it gave birth to a calf? Can we keep the calf? The calf is obviously innocent, but if we can't benefit from the cow, we're not going to be able to use its calf. Right, so that's what we're talking about here. Right, so if a cow killed a person and then it had the baby calf, and before, so if it had the calf before its verdict was finalized, then the offspring is permitted. But if it had the calf after its verdict was finalized and before it was executed, then the calf is not permitted. It's prohibited to benefit from that calf. Now, if this cow was intermingled with other cows, and the identity of the cow that killed a person cannot be determined, and those other cows become intermingled with yet other cows, the court gathers all of them into a vaulted chamber. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, says one brings them to court, and the court stones them. And the unattributed baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishna. Right? So apparently, even though all these other cows are innocent and didn't kill a person, we're not going to let them live if it means that an actual killer cow is going to go free. Right? Because a cow that kills people, we got to get rid of that cow. And that's why it's so important, obviously, to keep such a cow separated and not let it get intermingled. Because if it is intermingled, we're going to have to do in all those other cows. Now, the master says in the Baraisa, if the cow calved before its verdict was finalized, its offspring is permitted. So the Gemara asks, and is that the ruling, even though when it gored, it was already pregnant? But doesn't Rava say with regard to the offspring of a cow that gores while pregnant, it is prohibited to bring it as an offering, like any animal that killed a person, as the cow and its unborn offspring gored together. And similarly, with regard to the offspring of a cow that was the object of bestiality, while the offspring was in utero, it is prohibited to bring it as an offering, as the cow and its unborn offspring were the object of bestiality together. So this Baraisa poses a difficulty according to Rava. And the Gemara answers, amend the Baraisa and say that the reference is not to a case where a cow that was pregnant gored and killed a human. Rather, the reference is to a case where a cow was impregnated after it gored. And this is the distinction. If before its verdict was finalized, the cow was impregnated and calved, its offspring is permitted. If after the verdict was finalized, the cow was impregnated and calved, its offspring is forbidden together with it. And the Gemara challenges, this works out well according to the one who says that in a case where this permitted factor and that forbidden factor cause an outcome to be produced, so that outcome is forbidden. The offspring that was produced from a bull, from which deriving benefit is permitted, and a cow from which deriving benefit is forbidden, would therefore be forbidden as well. Right? So you got that? A cow that became forbidden because it was sentenced to die, but before it was executed, it was impregnated by a bull. The bull, no one ever sentenced it to die. It never hurt anybody. All right, so this calf is the product of a union between a permitted bull and a prohibited cow. Sounds like according to this view, the calf becomes prohibited. Now, page 80b. But according to the other view, the one who says that in a case where this permitted factor and that forbidden factor cause an outcome to be produced, the outcome is permitted, then what can be said? Right? So the cow became prohibited after its sentence was finalized. It was sentenced to die, but it hasn't been killed yet. And it was impregnated by this bull, but the bull is permitted. So according to this view, the calf between the prohibited cow and the permitted bull ought to be a permitted calf. You could eat it or use it as an offering. So this would contradict the previous view. So rather, Ravina says, amend the Baraisa and say that the distinction in the Baraisa is, if before its verdict was finalized, the cow was impregnated and it calved, its offspring is permitted. If before its verdict was finalized, the cow was impregnated, and after its verdict was finalized, it calved, then its offspring is forbidden, because the legal status of the fetus is not that of an independent entity. Rather, its status is like that of the mother's thigh, a part of its body. Therefore, when the mother is sentenced to death, the offspring is also forbidden to be brought as an offering once it is born. We're on page 80b. Now, the Mishnah teaches all those liable to be executed with different court-imposed death penalties who became intermingled are sentenced to the most lenient form of execution. And the Gemara noted, conclude from the Mishnah that an individual who is forewarned for a severe matter is forewarned for a lesser matter. Meaning, if one is forewarned that if he violates a certain prohibition, then he is liable to be stoned, while in fact, he is liable to be executed with a less severe form of execution, like let's say decapitation. Well, then the forewarning is effective, and he is executed with the less severe form of execution. If somebody says to you, yeah, if you kill that guy, you're going to be liable for murder, and you could be sentenced to death by stoning. And it turns out that, well, yeah, if he's found guilty, he'll be liable to the death penalty for this crime, but the punishment is decapitation, which is considered less severe than stoning. Well, then the warning remains valid because he was warned about a more severe penalty, and therefore we can impose the more lenient penalty of decapitation and consider that this person was warned properly. And that is the reason for the law in the Mishnah that even those liable to be executed with a more severe form of execution will be executed along with these other people with whom he was intermingled, since they're all subject to the death penalty. We just don't know which death penalty. Okay, so we'll apply the most lenient death penalty that applies to anyone in this room to all of them. Rabbi Yirmiyah rejects that proof and says, with what are we dealing here? It is a case where the witnesses forewarn the individual that if he violates a prohibition, he is liable to be executed, but they don't specify the mode of execution. And this law is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa. With regard to all the others, those who are liable for the various death penalties stated in the Torah, other than the inciter to idol worship, the court executes them only when the following elements are present. The congregation. What? Only a murderer who murders in the presence of the congregation is subject to the death penalty? No, that's not what it means. The congregation is represented by the court, as we shall see. And there were witnesses and forewarning. The witnesses have to say to the person, if you do this crime and you're found guilty by a court, they will sentence you to be executed by such and such penalty. Now, do we need the such and such penalty? Maybe not. But at the very least, if you do this crime, you are found guilty by a court, they will sentence you to the death penalty. And then the person goes and does it. That's what's required before a rabbinic court will impose a death penalty, except one who incites others to commit idolatry. There, those rules are relaxed. And it's easier to execute such a person. Now, so what are these elements? The congregation represented by the court, and witnesses, and forewarning just before the defendant commits the transgression. And the court does not execute him unless the witnesses inform the defendant that he is liable to receive the death penalty from the court. And Rabbi Yehuda says the defendant is not executed unless the witnesses inform the defendant by which specific form of death penalty he is to be executed. That's the minority view. So as long as they said you'll be subject to the death penalty if you're found guilty by the court, and they'll do it to you, and he does it anyway, then he can be sentenced to death. Rabbi Yehuda would add they have to tell you the particular form of death penalty, or the court can't impose it. Very dry in here. Nina, if you can hear me, I beg you, please bring a glass of water. Thank you. Okay, based on the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, who requires a specific death penalty to be part of the warning, it may be inferred that according to the first Tana, although they must inform him that he is liable to be executed, they are not required to inform him of the specific mode of execution. So the Gemara explains the basis for the dispute between the first Tana, who doesn't require the specific type of death penalty in the warning, and Rabbi Yehuda. Why do they disagree? The first Tana derived forewarning from the incident of the wood gatherer in the wilderness in Numbers 15:32 through 36, who was executed even though Moses did not know which death penalty would apply. You have to check with God first. So clearly, the mode of execution, thank you so much, honey. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'ak only he b'dvaro. So clearly, the mode of execution could not have been included in the forewarning of the wood gatherer. They didn't know which form of execution would apply. Rabbi Yehuda says the execution of the wood gatherer was a provisional edict based on the word of God, and the law throughout the generations cannot be derived from that unique case that happened in the wilderness when they consulted God about the law. Now, the Mishna teaches, in a case where those who are liable to be stoned were intermingled with those who are liable to be burned. This is where Rabbi Shimon disagrees with the majority on the severity, the relative severity of the different death penalties. Rabbi Shimon says they are all sentenced to be executed by stoning, because he considers that more lenient. And the rabbis say they're all sentenced to be executed by burning. And Rav Yecheskel taught a different version to Rami, his son. In a case where those who are liable to be burned were intermingled with those who are liable to be stoned, Rabbi Shimon says they shall all be sentenced to execution by stoning, as burning is a more severe form of execution. And Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Yecheskel, said to him, Father, do not teach it in that manner, as it is difficult to understand. Why does Rabbi Shimon teach that the person is why does Rabbi Shimon teach that the reason is specifically that burning is a more severe form of execution than stoning? Derive this law, that they would all be stoned in that situation, for a different reason. The principle with regard to a mixture is to follow the majority. And in this case, the majority of the intermingled group is liable to be stoned. So we're going to stone all of them since we don't know which is which. And Rav Yecheskel asked Rav Yehuda, so rather, how then should I teach it? And Rav Yehuda said, you should teach in a case where those who are liable to be stoned were intermingled with those who are liable to be burned, where the majority is liable to be burned, Rabbi Shimon says they shall all be sentenced to execution by stoning, as burning is a more severe form of execution. Rav Yecheskel, his father, asked, if so, say that the latter clause of the Mishnah and the rabbis say they're all sentenced to execution by burning, as stoning is a more severe form of execution. So if so, derive this law that they are burned because in this case, the majority of the intermingled group is liable to be burned, not because stoning is a more severe form of execution. Right? The general principle is, no, when they're intermingled, we apply the less severe form of execution to all of them. But is that really, that is the law, but is that really what they were saying? Or they were just saying, no, we're just following the majority where these people are intermingled. So Rav Yehuda answered, there in the latter clause, it is the rabbis who say to Rabbi Shimon, according to you, who say that burning is a more severe form of execution than stoning, the fact that the majority is liable to be burned does not warrant the execution of the entire group by burning, since the minority was sentenced to stoning, which is more lenient in your opinion. And that is not so, as stoning is a more severe form of execution. And that reason is extraneous, as in this case, they are burned because the majority of the group is liable to be burned. Right? So either way, we're going to get to burning, either because it's the majority or because it's more lenient, but we haven't established what the principle is when we don't have a majority. Now, when this narrative was heard, Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, right? Rav Yehuda, who corrected his father, Rabbi Yecheskel. So Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana. And he calls him Shinana. Now, Shinana is translated differently in different contexts. Usually it's somebody talking to Rav Yehuda. And either they're saying, sharp-toothed one, because your logic is very sharp, or they're saying, long-toothed one, because you're like a buck-toothed hick, who doesn't have good manners. Depends on the context. So here it's translated as long-toothed one, meaning you messed up, right? You acted like a lowlife when you corrected your father. Do not, now we're on page 81a, do not speak to your father in that manner, where you tell him directly that he is mistaken. Even if he made a mistake, you have to be very careful to honor your father. So rather, raise the matter in a more circumspect manner, as it is taught in a Baraisa. In a case where one's father was violating Torah matters, one should not say to his father, Father, you violated Torah matters. Rather, the son should say to him, Father, it is written in the Torah. Or rather, Father, it is written so in the Torah. And the Gemara asks, well, ultimately, isn't this formulation identical to that previous one, saying you're wrong? What you're doing is not what it's written in the Torah. So rather, one should say to his father, Father, there is a verse written in the Torah, and this is what it says. Tell him the law or the verse in a way in which it is not obvious that it relates to the action that the father just performed. Right? You have to inform him that he might have a mistaken understanding of what the law is while maintaining an absolutely respectful tone, so that you never rebuke your dad. You're just offering some wisdom that he might have overlooked or forgotten. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Now, Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 9. One who is liable to be executed with 2 different court-imposed death penalties because he violated 2 different capital transgressions is sentenced to the more severe form of execution. If one violated 1 transgression for which he is liable to receive 2 death penalties, for example, if a man engaged in intercourse with his mother-in-law, right, his wife's mother, very prohibited, right? So that would mean since he already slept with his wife, because she's his wife, and now he slept with her mother, right? So now he's slept with a woman and her mother. Torah calls that a depraved plot. Death penalty applies. So death penalty applies because it's his mother-in-law. But if she's married, then the death penalty also applies because he committed adultery. He slept with a married woman. Those are two different death penalties, right? Two different death penalties. One for sleeping with his mother-in-law, one for sleeping with a married woman, more generic. Since they're different death penalties, which one are we going to apply? He is sentenced to the more severe form of execution. Rabbi Yosef says he is sentenced to the form of execution that he is liable to receive due to the first relationship that came upon him. I.e., if she was his mother-in-law before she was married, then he is executed by burning for sleeping with his mother-in-law. But if she was married before she became his mother-in-law, then he is punished by strangulation for committing adultery. That's Mishnah 6. Now the Gemara. With regard to the ruling in the Mishnah, that one who is liable to be executed with two different court-imposed death penalties is sentenced to the more severe form of execution, the Gemara asks, is that obvious? Rather, would you say that he should profit from the fact that he violated a second capital transgression and thereby receive a more lenient punishment? Of course he should be subject to the more severe punishment. Rava says, with what are we dealing here? We're dealing with a case where he violated a relatively minor transgression, minor meaning it's still a death penalty offense, but of a less severe penalty than the other one. And his verdict was issued for this less severe death penalty offense. And then after his verdict was issued and before he was executed, he violated another death penalty offense with a stiffer death penalty, which, punishable by a more severe form of execution. Now, it could enter your mind to say that once his verdict was finalized for the less severe crime, and it was a death penalty verdict, right? So at that point, he's considered, legally speaking, a dead man by that first kind of penalty. So then if he managed somehow to commit another death penalty offense with a more severe penalty, you might have thought that the court isn't going to, sentence him to another stiffer death penalty because he's already a dead man. You might have thought that, but you'd be wrong. Since he managed to commit a more severe death penalty offense after he received his first sentence, now we're going to impose the more severe penalty. The father of Rav Yosef bar Chama asked of Rabba bar Nassan, from where is this matter that the sages stated derived? The following. One who is liable to be executed with two different court-imposed death penalties is sentenced to the more severe form of execution. Okay, that's our Mishnah. Where do we derive that? Rabba bar Nassan answered, it is derived from a verse as it is written, quote, and he begets a violent son, a shedder of blood, who does to a brother any of these. And he had not done any of these, for he has eaten upon the mountains and defiled his neighbor's wife, has wronged the poor and needy, has taken by robbery, does not return collateral, and has lifted his eyes toward the idols. He has committed abomination. Even in English translation, the rhythm of that doesn't sound like the Torah, right? Because it's not. It's Ezekiel, right? So we look for halachas to the Torah. The 613 commandments are in the Torah. Why are we looking to Ezekiel? Because the later prophets help us understand certain halachas and how they apply when there's a question that's not explicitly answered in the Torah. Then we look to the prophets, and the writings can help us clarify what the law is. But you can hear in that language, right? It's not the way a law would be stated in the Torah. So the question is, what is Ezekiel telling us? Now, this is interpreted. And he begets a violent son, a shedder of blood. This is one who is liable to be executed by beheading with a sword. Defiled his neighbor's wife. This is engaging in intercourse with a married woman, for which one is liable to be executed by strangulation. Lifted his eyes toward the idols. This is idol worship, for which one is liable to be executed by stoning. And it is written thereafter, he shall be put to death, his blood shall be upon himself. And this means that he is executed by stoning. This figure of speech implies stoning. So, since this same guy committed all these crimes, the penalties for which include decapitation and strangulation and stoning, and what do we apply? Stoning. So this must be the proof text that when you're liable to multiple death penalties of different kinds, we're going to apply the most severe form. So that is a proof text, but from Ezekiel. Now, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, that's not what it says. We can't learn that out from Ezekiel. You should say that all of the transgressions listed in the verse are punishable by the same death penalty, stoning. How? And he begets a violent son, a shedder of blood. This is the wayward and rebellious son, and his penalty is stoning. Defiled his neighbor's wife. This is engaging in intercourse with a betrothed young woman. Punishment for that? Stoning. Lifted his eyes toward the idols. This is idol worship, and the punishment for that is stoning. So the fact that we're going to apply stoning to this guy hasn't taught us anything about where different death penalties apply, because in this case, only stoning applies for all the different crimes that he committed. So the Gemara answers, if so, according to that understanding of the verse, what is Ezekiel teaching us? According to the first understanding, a new law is derived from here, that we apply the most severe form of punishment. But according to this interpretation of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, there's nothing new. So the Gemara rejects this contention. Well, perhaps it is that laws of the Torah that Ezekiel is merely reiterating, admonishing the people to fulfill the directives of the Torah. And he didn't come to teach some new law. And the Gemara answers, if it is so that was Ezekiel's intention, just to emphasize the laws that are already in the Torah, well, it would have been necessary for him to reiterate the laws in the manner that Moses, our teacher, reviewed the laws, employing the same language that Moses taught these laws in. The fact that Ezekiel diverged from Moses' formulation of the laws indicates that he did seek to teach us something new. Now, the Gemara cites a homiletic interpretation that Rav Acha, the son of Rabbi Hanina, taught. What is the meaning of that which is written? He did not eat upon the mountains, nor did he lift his eyes toward the idols of the house of Israel, nor did he defile his neighbor's wife, nor did he approach a menstruating woman. Right? This is as opposed to the one we just talked about who committed all these crimes. Now we're talking about a person who didn't commit those crimes. So what is Ezekiel telling us about this person? This cannot be understood literally, as refraining from performing these transgressions is not sufficient to characterize an individual as righteous, which is where Ezekiel is headed with this. So he did not eat upon the mountains doesn't just mean that he didn't eat on the mountains. It is an allusion to the fact that he did not eat due to the merit of his fathers. Rather, he relies on his own merit and righteousness. Right? We Jews all are blessed to have the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sustaining us. Right? In other words, God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their progeny would become as numerous as the sand on the shore and the stars in the sky. Right? And that's why the Jewish people, no matter how terrible our transgressions may have been in the thousands of years since, we're still here. Right? We're still here as a people. God loves us and has said so and promised Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses for that matter, that even though he might become very angry at us and banish us from the Holy Land, he would never forget us. There would always be a remnant of us that would exist and eventually would be gathered back from among the nations and brought to the Holy Land. Now, is that our merit? No, right? That is a promise that was made to our ancestors because they were so righteous that we, the descendants, would enjoy some level of protection based on the merit of our ancestors. Ezekiel is talking about here somebody who's not relying on that merit, but has his own merit, truly is a righteous person. And then the phrase, nor did he lift his eyes toward the idols of the house of nor did he lift his eyes toward the idols of the house of Israel. This is a reference to one who distances himself from anything even similar to idol worship, to the extent that he did not walk with upright stature, typical of a haughty person, as haughtiness is typical of idolaters. And here Ezekiel was talking about those members of the Jewish community that sinned and committed idolatry. The righteous one not only didn't go with them, but distanced himself from them in every possible way. Nor did he defile his neighbor's wife. This is an allusion to the fact that he did not infringe upon another person's trade, thereby compromising his livelihood. Right? This is somebody who's meticulously honest in all his affairs. Nor did he approach a menstruating woman. This is an allusion to the fact that he did not benefit from the charity fund, even if he was needy. And it is written with regard to one who refrains from these actions, he is a righteous man, he shall live. And the Gemara relates that was Ezekiel 18:9. So then the Gemara says, when Rabban Gamliel would teach this verse, and has kept all my statutes and has performed them, he shall live, in Ezekiel 18:19, he would cry and say, it is one who performs all of them who lives. One who performs one of them, no, he shall not live. Right? And this is a very, sort of blunt, almost blunt instrument understanding. Right? It doesn't address the fact that we know in this world, wicked people often prosper and righteous people often suffer. Is Rabban Gamliel saying, unless you're entirely righteous, you're subject to the vagaries, but if you were entirely righteous, you would never suffer or die a premature death? And so anyone who does suffer or suffers or dies a premature death is not entirely righteous? Maybe, in the sense that nobody is entirely righteous, except possibly there's 36 individuals in every generation known as the Lamed Vav-niks, right? The 36 who are saints, right? There are 36 hidden people in every generation who are entirely righteous. And if it wasn't for them, the whole world would be destroyed. God would just be fed up. But there's these entirely righteous people. Or what it might mean is, unless a person is striving to be righteous, even if he falls short, there's life for him in the world to come. And, very much our theology is that God holds everyone accountable, right? And when you leave this world, that's when the measures are balanced, right? And you're held accountable. You're rewarded for every good deed and held accountable for every misdeed. Those things are balanced against each other. Most people are going to fall short. They're going to spend some amount of time in Gehenna being refined, but then they'll go on to eternity in Olam Haba, in the world to come. Some people, very small, very, very tiny number, very tiny percentage of people are so entirely wicked that either they will just have no portion in the world to come, it's forfeit, or possibly even they'll just stay in Gehenna forever. But that's 0.00001%. Right? The vast majority of people have both good and bad to them, and that's going to get figured out in the next world. And then we have an infinite number of levels. Once they've finished their refining in Gehenna, many, many different neighborhoods in paradise where they could end up, and one that is appropriate to them and who they are and what they accomplished in this world. Okay. Rabbi Akiva said to Rabban Gamliel in an attempt to console him when Rabban Gamliel was saying, well, unless somebody's entirely righteous, he's going to suffer. But Rabbi Akiva said to him, if that is so, that the term all is understood in that manner, then with regard to that which is written concerning the forbidden relatives enumerated in the Torah, do not become defiled with all of these. And Leviticus 18:24, would you also say that there too, one who is in violation of all the prohibitions, yes, he is punished, but one who is in violation of one of them, no, he is not punished? Obviously not. We're not going to say that you only become punished for having sexual relations with prohibited people, you're only going to be punished when you've had relations with all of the people on the list of prohibited relationships? No, any one of them subjects you to be punished. So clearly the word all can't have that meaning. Rather, clearly all of these means in violation of one of these. And therefore, too, in the verse in Ezekiel, and he has kept all my statutes, means that in fulfillment of one of all these statutes, one merits eternal life. If you've done any good thing in this world, you can have eternal life, right? Unless the evil that you did is, so entirely evil. It's so harmful to so many, etc. Now, the Mishnah teaches, if one violated one transgression for which he is liable to receive 2 death penalties, he is sentenced to the more severe form of execution. And Rabbi Yosei says he is sentenced to the form of execution that he is liable to receive due to the first relationship that came upon him. It is taught in Baraisa how, meaning in what circumstances, does Rabbi Yosei say that he is sentenced to the first relationship that came upon him? If this woman was a widow or a divorcee when she became his mother-in-law, and then she became a married woman, and he engaged in intercourse with her, so he is sentenced to execution by burning because the first relationship, the first manner in which he was related to her was as son-in-law and mother-in-law, right? And not that she was because she wasn't a married woman at that time. Even though when he slept with her, she was both his mother-in-law and a married woman, she was first his mother-in-law and then a married woman. So that's why we would use the punishment of one who sleeps with a woman and her mother. But if she was already a married woman at the time that he married her daughter, and then he slept with her. So the first relationship that applied, so to speak, is adultery, because she was already a married woman at the time that he married her daughter. And then in that case, he would be sentenced to execution by strangulation for engaging in intercourse with a married woman. This is the minority view. In fact, we apply the more severe punishment. Rav Ada bar Ahava said to Rava, if this woman was a widow or a divorcee when she became his mother-in-law, and then she became a married woman and he engaged in intercourse with her, is he sentenced to execution by burning for engaging in intercourse with his mother-in-law? Why is this the law? Let him be sentenced for violating the prohibition of a married woman as well. As Rabbi Bahu says, Rabbi Yosei concedes in the case of an expanded prohibition. Rabbi Yosei holds that generally a prohibition does not take effect where another prohibition already exists. Nevertheless, when the second transgression is an expanded prohibition, i.e., one that incorporates additional people into the list of those for whom the items or individuals are forbidden, then Rabbi Yosei concedes that since the second prohibition applies to others, it takes effect concerning the person included in the first prohibition as well. In other words, if the mother-in-law, right, was a single woman when this man married her daughter, okay, so he is prohibited to sleep with his mother-in-law because she is his wife's mother. But other men are permitted to, marry her and sleep with her. She's not prohibited to all other men. She's only prohibited to him, her son-in-law, or any other son-in-law. But if she was married, then all men are prohibited to her, with the exception of her husband. So that's why they're talking about an expanded prohibition. So here too, the prohibition of intercourse with a married woman is expanded as it applies to everyone and is therefore more comprehensive than the prohibition of intercourse with his mother-in-law, which applies only to her sons-in-law. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yosei, he should be punished also for violating the prohibition of intercourse with a married woman. Okay, also, so both death penalties apply, but you can't kill him in 2 ways, right? You can't stone him and strangle him. So Rava said to him, Ada, my son, will you kill him with 2 death penalties? Rabbi Yosei concedes that the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with a married woman takes effect in addition to the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with his mother-in-law. If he had violated the transgression unwittingly, he then would have been liable to bring 2 sin offerings. But if he violated the transgression intentionally, it is impossible to execute him by strangulation after executing him by burning. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. We're on page 81b, Mishnah number 7. The hour is late, but we're going to keep going, and I'm going to go fast. Mishnah 7. One who is flogged for violating a prohibition and then repeated the violation and was flogged again assumes the status of a forewarned transgressor. And the court places him into la kippah, right, the vaulted chamber, and feeds him barley bread until his belly ruptures due to the low quality food, and he dies. Now, that's the Mishnah, the Gemara. Due to the fact that he was flogged and repeated the violation, does the court place him into the vaulted chamber for the duration of his life and advance his death, which is like executing him? Really? No. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, here we are dealing with lashes administered for violations of prohibitions punishable by excision from the world to come. Karas. In other words, death at the hands of the heavenly court. As when one violates such a prohibition, like incest, for example, the penalty for that is not death at the hands of an earthly court, death at the hands of the heavenly court. So an earthly court doesn't impose that death penalty. But if you're warned not to have sex with your sister and you do it anyway, the court will administer lashes. As when one violates such a prohibition, the man is essentially liable to be punished with death at the hand of heaven, but his death is not advanced by the court, as it is administered by the heavenly court. And in this case, since he surrenders his life through his repeated transgressions, we advance his execution upon him by placing him in the vaulted chamber. We don't stone him or strangle him, etc. But this is a person who has shown that he doesn't care how long he lives. He keeps violating something for which he was flogged to warn him that this is prohibited by the hands of the heavenly court. Since he keeps doing it, we lock him up so he won't keep doing it. Rabbi Yaakov, and he's going to die. It's a permanent lockup, right? Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yirmiyah per bar tachlifa, and it's not for years and years type of death row. You know, he's going to be in there days, weeks, months, and he's going to go. Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar tachlifa, come and I will explain to you the circumstances of this law. It is in a case where he was flogged with lashes for repeatedly violating one prohibition punishable with kares, that he is considered to have surrendered his life. But if he received lashes for violating 2 or for violating 3 different prohibitions, each of which has the same punishment, kares, death at the hands of the heavenly court, but he doesn't keep violating the same prohibition, then we don't lock him up in the vaulted chamber, as we say that he is merely tasting the taste of prohibition and wants to enjoy the different experiences, and he is not thereby surrendering his life to that extent. He's willing to be whipped for doing different things, but he hasn't given up his life for it. Now the Mishnah teaches, one who was flogged for violating a prohibition and then repeated the violation, the court places him into the vaulted chamber. And the Gemara infers, he is placed in the vaulted chamber if he repeated the violation, doing it a second time, even if he did not again repeat the violation, doing it a third time. So let us say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. As if it was in accordance with his opinion, doesn't he say, chazaka, right, presumptive status, is not established until an action is performed 3 times. When we say that something has performed 3 times, now we have a chazaka, a presumption that it will be performed again and again unless we step in and change things. But Rabban Gamliel says you can only establish a chazaka after 3 repetitions. Others say after 2. Ravina rejects this proof and says, even if you say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the Tan of our Mishnah holds that transgressions, not lashes, establish the presumptive status of the transgressor. Therefore, the Mishnah that teaches one who was flogged for violating a prohibition and then repeated the violation, and he was flogged a second time, he is placed in the vaulted chamber only after he violated the prohibition a third time. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He violated it 3 times. He was flogged the first 2 times. So after he did it the third time, we put him in the vaulted chamber. Or do we say he did it and was flogged 3 times, and then the 4th time he commits a transgression, then we put him in the vaulted chamber? That's what we're arguing about. So the Gemara raised an objection from a baraisa. If one performed a transgression that has lashes as its punishment, the first and second time the court flogs him, and the third time the court places him in the vaulted chamber. And Abba Shaul says even the third time the court flogs him, and only the fourth time that he does it, we put him in the vaulted chamber. So what? Is it not that everyone agrees that it's lashes that establish the chazaka, and it is concerning the dispute of Rebbe and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, whether the chazaka is established after 2 or 3 times, that the rabbis in Abba Shaul disagree. So 2 different disagreements. Do we establish a chazaka after 2 repetitions or 3 repetitions? And in the case of one who keeps violating transgressions, do we establish the chazaka after he did the bad thing 2 or 3 times? Or is it after he did the bad thing and was whipped for it, flogged for it? And then we're arguing it's 2 or 3 times. So the Gemara rejects the parallel. No, it can be explained that everyone, the rabbis and Abba Shaul, agree with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that the chazaka is established after 3 times. And here it is with regard to this matter that they disagree, that one sage, the rabbis, holds the transgressions establish the chazaka of a transgressor, and after he is flogged twice, and then he does the transgression a 3rd time, we put him in the vaulted chamber. And the other side of the argument, Abba Shaul, who argues with the majority, he holds that lashes are what's necessary to establish the chazaka. So after he transgresses and is flogged for it 3 times, then we have the chazaka, and he has to commit the transgression a 4th time before we stick him in the vaulted chamber. And the Gemara questions that interpretation of the dispute, and that which is taught in a baraisa with regard to a case where witnesses forewarned him that he was about to violate a prohibition punishable by lashes, and he was silent and did not acknowledge that he accepted the forewarning. And likewise a case where the witnesses forewarned him and he bowed his head, but did not explicitly acknowledge that he accepted the forewarning. The first and second time that they forewarn him, the court does not flog him because he did not accept the warning. We can't say he was warned before he committed it. We don't know if he heard the warning. If this scenario occurs a 3rd time, then the court sticks him in the vaulted chamber. But Abba Shaul says even the 3rd time the witnesses forewarn him, the court does not flog him, and it's only the 4th time that the court places him in the vaulted chamber. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And there, in the case in the baraisa, there are no lashes, as he did not explicitly acknowledge acceptance of the forewarning. Lashes are like the death penalty in that the court is not going to impose them on the defendant unless there were witnesses who said, if you do this thing and you're found guilty by a court and we're going to testify against you, then you're going to be subject to lashes. And the person goes ahead and does it anyway, right? But he has to also acknowledge that he was warned, right? Maybe he was deaf. Maybe he didn't hear the warning. You have to know that he acknowledged, right? You have to know that he heard the warning. He has to acknowledge it. Again, very difficult burden of proof to overcome. And there, in the case of the baraisa, there are no lashes, as he did not explicitly acknowledge the acceptance of the forewarning. So the reference is to a case where one violated the transgression several times, and if their dispute is not with regard to the number of times required to establish the chazaka, so with regard to what matter do they disagree? So Ravina says it is with regard to whether placing an individual in a vaulted chamber requires forewarning that they disagree. The rabbis hold that once he disregarded the forewarning 3 times, the court and he does it again, the court puts him in the vaulted chamber. Abba Shaul holds that after he is forewarned 3 times that he will be flogged if he performs a transgression, he requires an additional forewarning before the 4th time that he will be placed in a vaulted chamber if he performs a transgression again, and then he does it. Only then could you put him in the vaulted chamber. And the Gemara clarifies, and what is the nature of this vaulted chamber that we keep talking about? What is the vaulted chamber? So Rav Yehuda says it is a small chamber that is the full height of the transgressor, and it does not allow him to move in it. It's like you stick him in a phone booth. And the Gemara asks, and where is this punishment intimated? How do we know that this is a punishment? Where in the Torah is this even suggested? And Reish Lakish said that we have an intimation of it in the verse, evil shall kill the wicked. Psalm 34, verse 22. Ultimately, an evildoer finds his demise through his evil, and the result is this harsh form of death. And the Gemara cites a related statement. And Reish Lakish says, what is the meaning of that which is written? For man also knows not his time, like fish snared in an evil net. Ecclesiastes 9:12. What is the nature of this evil net? And Reish Lakish says it is a hook. Although it is small and the fish is much larger, the fish cannot escape it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7. And with God's help, we'll pick it up tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific, with Mishnah number 8. Looks like just one question from Joe. Why couldn't the judges and or witnesses ID the people? They were deemed competent enough to bring these people to execution. So you're talking about where a murderer, a convicted murderer, was intermingled, let's say, with other murderers who already received their sentence from the judge, and this one, never stood before the judges to receive his sentence, and now for some reason we don't know who's who. I think that this is a very much hypothetical situation that would never happen in the real world, and we just still need to understand what the law would be. Because you're absolutely right. Of course the witnesses had to be able to identify this person for the judges to conclude that he's guilty, and the judges had to be able to identify this person that they're now going to, bring him in and tell him you're sentenced to die. And so how could it be that they couldn't tell him apart from these other people? Either it's because they're triplets, right? Pretty extreme situation. Identical triplets, right? Or maybe it's because before they could finalize the verdict, the judges died. Maybe something happened. A war broke out, and everyone in the court, except the one who was being held, under guard somewhere else, and everyone in the courthouse, died. And so that's why the verdict was never finalized. It would have to be some very extreme situation. So your question is a valid one. So that's what I'm saying. It's probably hypothetical where something extreme happened like that. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, tomorrow, Thursday, regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific.